Book 1, Part 5 of Herodotus Histories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. Histories, Volume 1, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by A.D. Godley. Book 1, Part 5, paragraphs 79 to 93. When Cyrus marched away after the battle in the Pterian country, Cyrus, learning that Croesus had gone intending to disband his army, deliberated and perceived that it would be opportune for him to march quickly against Sardis before the power of the Lydians could be assembled again. This he decided, and this he did immediately. He marched his army into Lydia, and so came himself to bring the news of it to Croesus. All had turned out contrary to Croesus' expectation, and he was in a great quandary. Nevertheless, he led out the Lydians to battle. Now at this time there was no nation in Asia more valiant or warlike than the Lydian. It was their custom to fight on horseback, carrying long spears, and they were skilful at managing horses. So the armies met in the plain, wide and bare, that is before the city of Sardis. The Hilus and other rivers flow across it, and run violently together into the greatest of them, which is called Hermus. This flows from the mountain sacred to the mother Dindymene, and empties into the sea near the city of Persia. When Cyrus saw the Lydians manoeuvring their battle lines here, he was afraid of their cavalry, and therefore at the urging of one Harpagus, a Mede, he did as I shall describe. Assembling all the camels that followed his army bearing food and baggage, he took off their burdens, and mounted men upon them equipped like cavalrymen. Having equipped them, he ordered them to advance before his army against Croesus' cavalry. He directed the infantry to follow the camels, and placed all his cavalry behind the infantry. When they were all in order, he commanded them to kill all the other Lydians who came in their way, and spare none, but not to kill Croesus himself, even if he should defend himself against capture. Such was his command. The reason for his posting the camels to face the cavalry was this: horses fear camels, and can endure neither the sight nor the smell of them. This, then, was the intention of his manoeuvre, that Croesus' cavalry, on which the Lydian relied to distinguish himself, might be of no use. So when battle was joined, as soon as the horses smelled and saw the camels, they turned to flight, and all Croesus' hope was lost. Nevertheless the Lydians were no cowards. When they saw what was happening, they leaped from their horses and fought the Persians on foot. Many of both armies fell. At length the Lydians were routed and driven within their city wall, where they were besieged by the Persians. So then they were besieged. But Croesus, supposing that the siege would last a long time, again sent messengers from the city to his allies. Whereas the former envoys had been sent to summon them to muster at Sardis in 5 months' time, these were to announce that Croesus was besieged, and to plead for help as quickly as possible. So he sent to the Lacedaemonians as well as to the rest of the allies. Now at this very time the Spartans themselves were feuding with the Argives over the country called Thyrii, for this was a part of the Argive territory which the Lacedaemonians had cut off and occupied. All the land towards the west as far as Malea belonged then to the Argives, and not only the mainland, but the island of Cythera and the other islands. The Argives came out to save their territory from being cut off. Then, after debate, the two armies agreed that 300 of each side should fight, and whichever party won would possess the land. The rest of each army was to go away to its own country and not be present at the battle, since if the armies remained on the field, the men of either party might render assistance to their comrades if they saw them losing. Having agreed, the armies drew off, and picked men of each side remained and fought. Neither could gain advantage in the battle. At last only 3 out of the 600 were left, Alcina and Chromius of the Argives, Othryodes of the Lacedaemonians. These 3 were left alive at nightfall. Then the 2 Argives, believing themselves victors, ran to Argos. But Othryodes the Lacedaemonian, after stripping the Argive dead and taking the arms to his camp, waited at his position. On the 2nd day both armies came to learn the issue. For a while both claimed the victory, the Argives arguing that more of their men had survived, the Lacedaemonians showing that the Argives had fled, while their man had stood his ground and stripped the enemy dead. At last, from arguing, they fell to fighting. Many of both sides fell, but the Lacedaemonians gained the victory. The Argives, who before had worn their hair long by fixed custom, shaved their heads ever after, and made a law, with a curse added to it, that no Argive grow his hair, and no Argive woman wear gold, until they recovered Thyrii. And the Lacedaemonians made a contrary law, that they wear their hair long ever after, for until now they had not worn it so. Othryodes, the lone survivor of the 300, was ashamed, it is said, to return to Sparta after all the men of his company had been killed, and killed himself on the spot at Thyrii. The Sardian herald came after this had happened to the Spartans to ask for their help for Croesus, now besieged. None the less, when they heard the herald, they prepared to send help. But when they were already equipped and their ships ready, a second message came that the fortification of the Lydians was taken, and Croesus a prisoner. Then, though very sorry indeed, they ceased their efforts. This is how Sardis was taken. When Croesus had been besieged for 14 days, Cyrus sent horsemen around in his army to promise to reward whoever first mounted the wall. After this the army made an assault, but with no success. Then, when all the others were stopped, a certain Mardian called Herodotus attempted to mount by a part of the Acropolis where no guard had been set, since no one feared that it could be taken by an attack made here. For here the height on which the Acropolis stood is sheer, and unlikely to be assaulted. This was the only place where Meles, the former king of Sardis, had not carried the lion which his concubine had borne him, the Telmessians having declared that if this lion were carried around the walls, Sardis could never be taken. Meles then carried the lion around the rest of the wall of the Acropolis, where it could be assaulted, but neglected this place, because the height was sheer, and defied attack. It is on the side of the city which faces towards Tumolus. The day before, then, Herodotus, this Mardian, had seen one of the Lydians come down by this part of the Acropolis after a helmet that had fallen down, and fetch it. He took note of this, and considered it. And now he climbed up himself, and other Persians after him. Many ascended, and thus Sardis was taken, and all the city sacked. I will now relate what happened to Croesus himself. He had a son, whom I have already mentioned, fine in other respects, but mute. Now in his days of prosperity past, Croesus had done all that he could for his son, and besides resorting to other devices, he had sent to Delphi to inquire of the oracle concerning him. The Pythian priestess answered him thus: "Lydian, king of many, greatly foolish Croesus, Wish not to hear in the palace the voice often prayed for of your son speaking. It were better for you that he remain mute as before, for on an unlucky day shall he first speak." So at the taking of the fortification, a certain Persian, not knowing who Croesus was, came at him, meaning to kill him. Croesus saw him coming, but because of the imminent disaster he was past caring, and it made no difference to him whether he was struck and killed. But this mute son, when he saw the Persian coming on, in fear and distress broke into speech and cried, "Man, do not kill Croesus!" This was the first word he uttered, and after that, for all the rest of his life, he had power of speech. The Persians gained Sardis and took Croesus prisoner. Croesus had ruled 14 years and been besieged 14 days. Fulfilling the oracle, he had destroyed his own great empire. The Persians took him and brought him to Cyrus, who erected a pyre, and mounted Croesus atop it, bound in chains, with twice 7 sons of the Lydians beside him. Cyrus may have intended to sacrifice him as a victory offering to some god, or he may have wished to fulfill a vow, or perhaps he had heard that Croesus was pious, and put him atop the pyre to find out if some divinity would deliver him from being burned alive. So Cyrus did this. As Croesus stood on the pyre, even though he was in such a wretched position, it occurred to him that Solon had spoken with God's help when he had said that no one among the living is fortunate. When this occurred to him, he heaved a deep sigh, and groaned aloud after long silence, calling out 3 times the name Solon. Cyrus heard, and ordered the interpreters to ask Croesus who he was invoking. They approached and asked, but Croesus kept quiet at their questioning, until finally they forced him, and he said, "I would prefer to great wealth his coming into discourse with all despots." Since what he said was unintelligible, they again asked what he had said, persistently harassing him. He explained that first Solon the Athenian had come and seen all his fortune, and spoken as if he despised it. Now everything had turned out for him as Solon had said, speaking no more of him than of every human being, especially those who think themselves fortunate. While Croesus was relating all this, the pyre had been lit, and the edges were on fire. When Cyrus heard from the interpreters what Croesus said, he relented, and considered that he, a human being, was burning alive another human being, one his equal in good fortune. In addition, he feared retribution, reflecting how there is nothing stable in human affairs. He ordered that the blazing fire be extinguished as quickly as possible, and that Croesus and those with him be taken down. But despite their efforts, they could not master the fire. Then the Lydians say that Croesus understood Cyrus' change of heart, and when he saw every one trying to extinguish the fire, but unable to check it, he invoked Apollo, crying out that if Apollo had ever been given any pleasing gift by him, let him offer help and deliver him from the present evil. Thus he in tears invoked the god, and suddenly out of a clear and windless sky clouds gathered, a storm broke, and it rained violently, extinguishing the pyre. Thus Cyrus perceived that Croesus was dear to God and a good man. He had him brought down from the pyre, and asked, "Croesus, what man persuaded you to wage war against my land, and become my enemy instead of my friend?" He replied, "O king, I acted thus for your good fortune, but for my own ill fortune. The god of the Hellenes is responsible for these things, inciting me to wage war. No one is so foolish as to choose war over peace. In peace sons bury their fathers, in war fathers bury their sons. But I suppose it was dear to the divinity that this be so." Croesus said this, and Cyrus freed him, and made him sit near, and was very considerate to him. And both he and all that were with him were astonished when they looked at Croesus. He, for his part, was silent, deep in thought. Presently he turned and said, for he saw the Persians sacking the city of the Lydians, "O king, am I to say to you what is in my mind now, or keep silent?" When Cyrus urged him to speak up boldly, Croesus asked, "The multitude there, what is it at which they are so busily engaged?" "They are plundering your city," said Cyrus, "and carrying off your possessions." "No," Croesus answered, "not my city, and not my possessions, for I no longer have any share of all this. It is your wealth that they are pillaging." Cyrus thought about what Croesus had said, and, telling the rest to withdraw, asked Croesus what fault he saw in what was being done. "Since the gods have made me your slave," replied the Lydian, "it is right that if I have any further insight I should point it out to you. The Persians, being by nature violent men, are poor, so if you let them seize and hold great possessions, you may expect that he who has got most will revolt against you. Therefore do this, if you like what I say. Have men of your guard watch all the gates. Let them take the spoil from those who are carrying it out, and say that it must be paid as a tithe to Zeus. Thus you shall not be hated by them for taking their wealth by force, and they, recognizing that you act justly, will give up the spoil willingly." When Cyrus heard this, he was exceedingly pleased, for he believed the advice good; and praising him greatly, and telling his guard to act as Croesus had advised, he said, "Croesus, now that you, a king, are determined to act and to speak with integrity, ask me directly for whatever favor you like." "Master," said Croesus, "you will most gratify me if you will let me send these chains of mine to that god of the Greeks whom I especially honored, and to ask him if it is his way to deceive those who serve him well." When Cyrus asked him what grudge against the god led him to make this request, Croesus repeated to him the story of all his own aspirations and the answers of the oracles, and more particularly his offerings, and how the oracle had encouraged him to attack the Persians; and so saying he once more insistently pled that he be allowed to reproach the god for this. At this Cyrus smiled, and replied, "This I will grant you, Croesus, and whatever other favor you may ever ask me." When Croesus heard this, he sent Lydians to Delphi, telling them to lay his chains on the doorstep of the temple, and to ask the god if he were not ashamed to have persuaded Croesus to attack the Persians, telling him that he would destroy Cyrus' power, of which power, they were to say, showing the chains, these were the first fruits. They should ask this, and further, if it were the way of the Greek gods to be ungrateful. When the Lydians came and spoke as they had been instructed, the priestess, it is said, made the following reply: "No one may escape his lot, not even a god. Croesus has paid for the sin of his ancestor of the 5th generation before, who was led by the guile of a woman to kill his master, though he was one of the guard of the Heraclidae, and who took to himself the royal state of that master, to which he had no right. And it was the wish of Loxias that the evil lot of Sardis fall in the lifetime of Croesus' sons, not in his own. But he could not deflect the fates. Yet, as far as they gave in, he did accomplish his wish, and favour Croesus, for he delayed the taking of Sardis for 3 years. And let Croesus know this, that although he is now taken, it is by so many years later than the destined hour. And further, Loxias saved Croesus from burning. But as to the oracle that was given to him, Croesus is wrong to complain concerning it. For Loxias declared to him that if he led an army against the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Therefore he ought, if he had wanted to plan well, to have sent and asked whether the god spoke of Croesus or of Cyrus' empire. But he did not understand what was spoken, or make further inquiry, for which now let him blame himself. When he asked that last question of the oracle, and Loxias gave him that answer concerning the mule, even that Croesus did not understand. For that mule was in fact Cyrus, who was the son of 2 parents not of the same people, of whom the mother was better and the father inferior. For she was a Mede and the daughter of Astyages, king of the Medes, but he was a Persian and a subject of the Medes, and although in all respects her inferior, he married this lady of his. This was the answer of the priestess to the Lydians. They carried it to Sardis, and told Croesus, and when he heard it, he confessed that the sin was not the gods, but his. And this is the story of Croesus' rule, and of the first overthrow of Ionia. There are many offerings of Croesus in Hellas, and not only those of which I have spoken. There is a golden tripod at Thebes in Boeotia, which he dedicated to Apollo of Ismenus. At Ephesus there are the oxen of gold, and the greater part of the pillars. And in the temple of Pronaea at Delphi a golden shield. All these survived to my lifetime, but other of the offerings were destroyed. And the offerings of Croesus at Branchidae of the Milesians, as I learn by inquiry, are equal in weight and like those at Delphi. Those which he dedicated at Delphi and the shrine of Amphiaraus were his own, the first fruits of the wealth inherited from his father. The rest came from the estate of an enemy who had headed a faction against Croesus before he became king, and conspired to win the throne of Lydia for Pantaleon. This Pantaleon was a son of Alyattes, and half-brother of Croesus. Croesus was Alyattes' son by a Carian, and Pantaleon by an Ionian mother. So when Croesus gained the sovereignty by his father's gift, he put the man who had conspired against him to death by drawing him across a carding comb, and first confiscated his estate, then dedicated it as and where I have said. This is all that I shall say of Croesus' offerings. There are not many marvellous things in Lydia to record in comparison with other countries, except the gold dust that comes down from Tmolus. But there is one building to be seen there, which is much the greatest of all, except those of Egypt and Babylon. In Lydia is the tomb of Alyattes, the father of Croesus, the base of which is made of great stones, and the rest of it of mounded earth. It was built by the men of the market, and the craftsmen, and the prostitutes. There survived until my time 5 cornerstones set on the top of the tomb, and in these was cut the record of the work done by each group, and measurement showed that the prostitutes' share of the work was the greatest. All the daughters of the common people of Lydia ply the trade of prostitutes to collect dowries until they can get themselves husbands, and they themselves offer themselves in marriage. Now this tomb has a circumference of 1,390 yards, and its breadth is above 440 yards. And there is a great lake hard by the tomb, which, the Lydians say, is fed by ever-flowing springs. It is called the Gygaean Lake. Such, then, is this tomb. End of Book 1, Part 5.
Book 1, Part 6 of Herodotus Histories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie van Wallichem. Histories, Volume 1, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by A.D. Godley. Book 1, Part 6, Paragraph 94 to 113. Herodotus, Book 1, Part 6. The customs of the Lydians are like those of the Greeks, except that they make prostitutes of their female children. They were the first men whom we know who coined and used gold and silver currency, and they were the first to sell by retail. And according to what they themselves say, the games now in use among them and the Greeks were invented by the Lydians. These, they say, were invented among them at the time when they colonized Tyrrhenia. This is their story. In the reign of Attis, son of Menes, there was great scarcity of food in all Lydia. For a while the Lydians bore this with what patience they could. Presently, when the famine did not abate, they looked for remedies, and different plans were devised by different men. Then it was that they invented the games of dice and knucklebones, and ball, and all other forms of game except dice, which the Lydians do not claim to have discovered. Then, using their discovery to lighten the famine, every other day they would play for the whole day, so that they would not have to look for food, and the next day they quit their play and ate. This was their way of life for 18 years. But the famine did not cease to trouble them, and instead afflicted them even more. At last their king divided the people into 2 groups, and made them draw lots, so that the one group should remain and the other leave the country. He himself was to be the head of those who drew the lot to remain there, and his son, whose name was Tyrannus, of those who departed. Then the one group, having drawn the lot, left the country and came down to Smyrna and built ships, in which they loaded all their goods that could be transported aboard ship, and sailed away to seek a livelihood in the country, until at last, after sojourning with one people after another, they came to the Umbrici, where they founded cities and have lived ever since. They no longer called themselves Lydians but Tyrrhenians, after the name of the king's son who had led them there. The Lydians, then, were enslaved by the Persians. But the next business of my history is to inquire who this Cyrus was who took down the power of Croesus, and how the Persians came to be the rulers of Asia. I mean then to be guided in what I write by some of the Persians, who desire not to magnify the story of Cyrus, but to tell the truth, though there are no less than 3 other accounts of Cyrus which I could give. After the Assyrians had ruled Upper Asia for 520 years, the Medes were the first to begin to revolt from them. These, it would seem, proved their bravery in fighting for freedom against the Assyrians. They cast off their slavery and won freedom. Afterwards, the other subject nations too did the same as the Medes. All of those on the mainland were now free men, but they came to be ruled by monarchs again, as I will now relate. There was among the Medes a clever man called Deioces. He was the son of Phraaortes. Deioces was infatuated with sovereignty, and so he set about gaining it. Already a notable man in his own town, one of the many towns into which Media was divided, he began to profess and practice justice more constantly and zealously than ever, and he did this even though there was much lawlessness throughout the land of Media, and though he knew that injustice is always the enemy of justice. Then the Medes of the same town, seeing his behaviour, chose him to be their judge, and he, for he coveted sovereign power, was honest and just. By acting so, He won no small praise from his fellow townsmen, to such an extent that when the men of the other towns learned that Deioces alone gave fair judgments, having before suffered from unjust decisions, they came often and gladly to plead before Deioces, and at last they would submit to no arbitration but his. The number of those who came grew ever greater, for they heard that each case turned out in accord with the truth. Then Deioces, seeing that everything now depended on him, would not sit in his former seat of judgment, and said he would give no more decisions, for it was of no advantage to him, he said, to leave his own business and spend all day judging the cases of his neighbours. This caused robbery and lawlessness to increase greatly in the towns, and gathering together, the Medes conferred about their present affairs, and said, here as I suppose the main speakers were Deioces' friends, "Since we cannot go on living in the present way in the land, come, let us set up a king over us. In this way the land will be well governed, and we ourselves shall attend to our business and not be routed by lawlessness." With such words they persuaded themselves to be ruled by a king. The question was at once propounded, whom should they make king? Then every man was loud in putting Deioces forward and praising Deioces, until they agreed that he should be their king. He ordered them to build him houses worthy of his royal power, and strengthen him with a bodyguard. The Medes did so. They built him a big and strong house wherever in the land he indicated to them, and let him choose a bodyguard out of all the Medes. And having obtained power, he forced the Medes to build him one city and to fortify and care for this more strongly than all the rest. The Medes did this for him too. So he built the big and strong walls, one standing inside the next in circles, which are now called Ecbatana. This fortress is so designed that each circle of walls is higher than the next outer circle by no more than the height of its battlements, to which plan the site itself, on a hill in the plain, contributes somewhat, but chiefly it was accomplished by skill. There are 7 circles in all. Within the innermost circle are the palace and the treasuries, and the longest wall is about the length of the wall that surrounds the city of Athens. The battlements of the first circle are white, of the second black, of the third circle purple, of the fourth blue, and of the fifth orange. Thus the battlements of 5 circles are painted with colours, and the battlements of the last 2 circles are coated, the one with silver and the other with gold. Deioces built these walls for himself and around his own quarters, and he ordered the people to dwell outside the wall. And when it was all built, Deioces was first to establish the rule that no one should come into the presence of the king, but everything should be done by means of messengers, that the king should be seen by no one, and moreover, that it should be a disgrace for anyone to laugh or to spit in his presence. He was careful to hatch himself with all this, so that the men of his own age, who had been brought up with him and were as nobly born as he and his equals in courage, instead of seeing him and being upset and perhaps moved to plot against him, might by reason of not seeing him believe him to be different. When he had made these arrangements and strengthened himself with sovereign power, he was a hard man in the protection of justice. They would write down their pleas and send them in to him. Then he would pass judgment on what was brought to him and send his decisions out. This was his manner of deciding cases at law, and he had other arrangements too, for when he heard that a man was doing violence, he would send for him and punish him as each offence deserved, and he had spies and eavesdroppers everywhere in his domain. Deioces then united the Median nation by itself and ruled it. The Median tribes are these: the Busei, the Parytessinae, the Strocates, the Arizentai, the Budii, the Magi. Their tribes are this many. Deioces had a son, Phraortes, who inherited the throne when Deioces died after a reign of 53 years. Having inherited it, he was not content to rule the Medes alone. Marching against the Persians, he attacked them first, and they were the first whom he made subject to the Medes. Then, With these two strong nations at his back, he subjugated one nation of Asia after another, until he marched against the Assyrians, that is, against those of the Assyrians who held Ninus. These had formerly been rulers of all, but now their allies had deserted them, and they were left alone, though well off themselves. Marching against these Assyrians, then, Phraates and most of his army perished after he had reigned 22 years. At his death he was succeeded by his son Cyaxares. He is said to have been a much greater soldier than his ancestors. It was he who first organized the men of Asia in companies and posted each arm apart, the spearmen and archers and cavalry. Before this they were all mingled together in confusion. This was a king who fought against the Lydians when the day was turned to night in the battle, and who united under his dominion all of Asia that is beyond the river Halys. Collecting all his subjects, he marched against Ninus, wanting to avenge his father and to destroy the city. He defeated the Assyrians in battle, but while he was besieging their city, a great army of Scythians came down upon him, led by their king Medes, son of Protothenes. They had invaded Asia after they had driven the Cimmerians out of Europe. Pursuing them in their flight, the Scythians came to the Median country. It is a 30 days' journey for an unencumbered man from the Maeacian lake to the river Phasis and the land of the Colchi. From the Colchi it is an easy matter to cross into Media. There is only one nation between, the Cespares. To pass these is to be in Media. Nevertheless, it was not by this way that the Scythians entered. They turned aside and came by the upper and much longer way, keeping the Caucasian mountains on their right. There the Medes met the Scythians, who defeated them in battle, deprived them of their rule, and made themselves masters of all Asia. From there they marched against Egypt, and when they were in the part of Syria called Palestine, Psammaticus, king of Egypt, met them and persuaded them with gifts and prayers to come no further. So they turned back, and when they came on their way to the city of Ascalon in Syria, most of the Scythians passed by and did no harm, but a few remained behind and plundered the temple of heavenly Aphrodite. This temple, I discover from making inquiry, is the oldest of all the temples of the goddess, for the temple in Cyprus was founded from it, as the Cyprians themselves say, and the temple on Statira was founded by Phoenicians from this same land of Syria. But the Scythians who pillaged the temple, and all their descendants after them, were afflicted by the goddess with the female sickness, and so the Scythians say that they are afflicted as a consequence of this, and also that those who visit Scythian territory see among them the condition of those whom the Scythians call hermaphrodites. The Scythians then ruled Asia for 28 years, and the whole land was ruined because of their violence and their pride. For besides exacting from each the tribute which was assessed, they rode about the land carrying off every one's possessions. Most of them were entertained and made drunk and then slain by Cyaxares and the Medes. So thus the Medes took back their empire and all that they had formerly possessed. And they took Ninus, how I will describe in a later part of my history, and brought all Assyria except the province of Babylon under their rule. Afterwards Cyaxares died after a reign of 40 years, among which I count the years of the Scythian domination, and his son Astyages inherited the sovereignty. Astyages had a daughter whom he called Mandane. He dreamt that she urinated so much that she filled his city and flooded all of Asia. He communicated this vision to those of the Magi who interpreted dreams, and when he heard what they told him, he was terrified. And presently, when Mandane was of marriageable age, he feared the vision too much to give her to any Mede worthy to marry into his family, but married her to a Persian called Cambyses, a man whom he knew to be well born and of a quiet temper, for Astyages held Cambyses to be much lower than a Mede of middle rank. But during the first year that Mandane was married to Cambyses, Astyages saw a second vision. He dreamed that the vine grew out of the genitals of his daughter, and that the vine covered the whole of Asia. Having seen this vision and communicated it to the interpreters of dreams, he sent to the Persians for his daughter, who was about to give birth, and when she arrived kept her guarded, meaning to kill whatever child she bore, for the interpreters declared that the meaning of his dream was that his daughter's offspring would rule in his place. Anxious to prevent this, Astyages, when Cyrus was born, summoned Harpagus, a man of his household who was his most faithful servant among the Medes, and was administrator of all that was his, and he said, "Harpagus, whatever business I turn over to you, do not mishandle it, and do not leave me out of account, and, giving others preference, trip over your own feet afterwards. Take the child that Mandane bore, and carry him to your house, and kill him, and then bury him however you like." "O king," Harpagus answered, "never yet have you noticed anything displeasing in your man, and I shall be careful in the future too not to err in what concerns you. If it is your will that this be done, then my concern ought to be attended to it scrupulously." Harpagus answered this. The child was then given to him, consigned to its death, and he went to his house weeping. When he came in, he told his wife the entire speech uttered by Astyages. "Now then," she said to him, "what do you propose to do?" "Not to obey Astyages' instructions," he answered, "not even if he should lose his mind and be more frantic than he is now. I will not lend myself to his plan or be an accessory to such a murder. There are many reasons why I will not kill him. Because the child is related to me, and because Astyages is old and has no male children. Now if the sovereignty passes to this daughter of his after his death, whose son he is now killing by means of me, what is left for me but the gravest of all dangers? For the sake of my safety this child has to die, but one of Astyages' own people has to be the murderer, and not one of mine." So saying, he sent a messenger at once to one of Astyages' cowherds, who he knew pastured his herds in the likeliest spots, and where the mountains were most infested with wild beasts. The man's name was Mithridates, and his wife was a slave like him. Her name was in the Greek language Zeno, and the Median Spaker, for spax is a Median word for dog. The foothills of the mountains where this cowherd pastured his cattle are north of Ecbatana, towards the Euxine Sea. For the rest of Media is everywhere a level plain, but here on the side of the Thespais the land is very high and mountainous and covered with woods. So when the cowherd came in haste at the summons, Harpagus said, "Astyages wants you to take this child and leave it in the most desolate part of the mountains, so that it will perish as quickly as possible, and he wants me to tell you that if you do not kill it but preserve it somehow, you will undergo the most harrowing death, and I am ordered to see it exposed." Hearing this, the cowherd took the child and went back the same way and came to his dwelling. Now, as it happened, his wife too had been on the verge of delivering every day, and as the divinity would have it, she did in fact give birth while the cowherd was away in the city. Each of them was anxious for the other, the husband being afraid about his wife's labour, and the wife because she did not know why Harpagus had so unexpectedly sent for her husband. So when he returned and stood before her, she was startled by the unexpected sight, and asked him before he could speak why Harpagus had so insistently summoned him. "Wife," he said, "when I came to the city I saw and heard what I ought never to have seen, and what ought never to have happened to our masters. Harpagus' whole house was full of weeping. Astonished I went in, and immediately I saw a child lying there struggling and crying, adorned in gold and embroidered clothing. And when Harpagus saw me, he told me to take the child in haste and bring it away and leave it where the mountains are the most infested with wild beasts. It was Astyages, he said, who enjoined this on me, and Harpagus threatened me grievously if I did not do it. So I took him and brought him away, supposing him to be the child of one of the servants, for I could never have guessed whose he was. But I was amazed at seeing him adorned with gold and clothing, and at hearing too the evident sound of weeping in the house of Harpagus. And very soon, on the way, I learned the whole story from the servant who brought me out of the city, and gave the child into my custody, namely, that it was the son of Mandane, the king's daughter, and Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, and that Astyages gave the command to kill him, and now here he is." And as he said this, the cowherd uncovered it and showed it. But when the woman saw how fine and fair the child was, she began to cry and laid hold of the man's knees and begged him by no means to expose him. But the husband said he could not do otherwise, for he said spies would be coming from Harpagus to see what was done, and he would have to die a terrible death if he did not obey. Being unable to move her husband, the woman then said, "Since I cannot convince you not to expose it, then, if a child has to be seen exposed, do this. I too have borne a child, but I bore it dead. Take this one and put it out, but the child of the daughter of Astyages let us raise it as if it were our own. This way you won't be caught disobeying our masters, and we will not have plotted badly. For the dead child will have royal burial, and the living will not lose his wife." Thinking that his wife advised him excellently in his present strait, the coward immediately did as she said. He gave his wife the child whom he had brought to kill, and his own dead child he put into the chest in which he carried the other, and dressed it with all the other's child finery, and left it out in the most desolate part of the mountains. Then, on the third day after leaving the child out, the cowherd left one of his herdsmen to watch it, and went to the city, where he went to Harpagus' house, and said he was ready to show the child's dead body. Harpagus sent the most trusted of his bodyguard, and these saw for him and buried the cowherd's child. So it was buried, and the cowherd's wife kept and raised the boy, who was afterwards named Cyrus, but she did not give him that name, but another.
Book 1, Part 7. Now, when the boy was 10 years old, the truth about him was revealed in some such way as this. He was playing in the village where these herdsmen's quarters were, playing in the road with others of his age. The boys, while playing, chose to be their king, this one who was supposed to be the son of the cowherd. Then he assigned some of them to the building of houses, some to be his bodyguard, one doubtless to be the king's eye. To another he gave the right of bringing him messages. To each he gave his proper work. Now one of these boys playing with him was the son of Artembares, a notable Mede. When he did not perform his assignment from Cyrus, Cyrus told the other boys to seize him, and when they did so, he handled the boy very roughly and whipped him. As soon as he was let go, very upset about the indignity he had suffered, he went down to his father in the city and complained of what he had received at the hands of the son of Astyages' cowherd, not calling him Cyrus, for that name had not yet been given. Artembares, going just as angry as he was to Astyages and bringing his son along, announced that an impropriety had been committed, saying, "O king, by your slave, the son of a cowherd, we have been outraged thus," and with that he bared his son's shoulders. When Astyages heard and saw, he was ready to avenge the boy in view of Artembares' rank, so he sent for the cowherd and his son. When they were both present, Astyages said, fixing his eyes on Cyrus, "Is it you, then, the child of one such as this, who have dared to lay hands on the son of the greatest of my courtiers?" Cyrus answered, "Master, what I did to him I did with justice. The boys of the village, of whom he was one, chose me while playing to be their king, for they thought me the most fit for this. The other boys then did as assigned, but this one was disobedient and cared nothing for me, for which he got what he deserved. Now if I deserve punishment for this, here I am to take it." While the boy spoke, it seemed to Astyages that he recognized him. The character of his face was like his own, he thought, and his manner of answering was freer than customary, and the date of the exposure seemed to agree with the boy's age. Astonished at this, he sat a while silent, but when at last with difficulty he could collect his wits, he said, for he wanted to be rid of Artambares and question the cowherd with no one present, "I shall act in such a way, Artambares, that you and your son shall have no cause of complaint." So he sent Artambares away, and the attendants led Cyrus inside at Astyages' bidding. When the cowherd was left quite alone, Astyages asked him where he had got the boy, and who had been the giver. The cowherd answered that Cyrus was his own son, and that the mother was still with him. Astyages said that he was not well advised if he wished to find himself in a desperate situation, and as he said this made a sign to the spear-bearers to seize him. Then, under stress of necessity, the cowherd disclosed to him the whole story, telling everything exactly as it had happened from the beginning, and at the end fell to entreaty and urged the king to pardon him. When the cowherd had discovered the true story, Astyages took less interest in him, but he was very angry with Harpagus and asked the guards to summon him. Harpagus came, and Astyages asked him, "Harpagus, how did you kill the boy, my daughter's son, whom I gave you?" Harpagus, when he saw the cowherd was there, did not take the way of falsehood, lest he be caught and confuted. "O king," he said, "when I took the boy, I thought and considered how to do what you wanted, and not be held a murderer by your daughter or by you, even though I was blameless toward you. So I did this. I summoned this cowherd here, and gave the child to him, telling him that it was you who gave the command to kill it, and that was the truth, for such was your command. But I gave the child with the instructions that the cowherd was to lay it on a desolate mountainside and wait there and watch until it was dead, and I threatened all sorts of things if he did not accomplish this. Then, when he had done what he was told, and the child was dead, I sent the most trusted of my eunuchs and had the body viewed and buried. This, O king, is the story, and such was the end of the boy." Harpagus told the story straight, while Astyages, hiding the anger that he felt against him for what had been done, first repeated the story again to Harpagus exactly as he had heard it from the cowherd. Then, after repeating it, ended by saying that the boy was alive and that the matter had turned out well. "For," he said, "I was greatly afflicted by what had been done to this boy, and it weighed heavily on me that I was estranged from my daughter. Now then, in this good turn of fortune, send your own son to this boy newly come, and since I am about to sacrifice for the boy's safety to the gods, to whom this honor is due, come here to dine with me." When Harpagus heard this, he bowed and went to his home, very pleased to find that his offense had turned out for the best, and that he was invited to dinner in honor of this fortunate day. Coming in, he told his only son, a boy of about 13 years of age, to go to Astyages' palace and do whatever the king commanded, and in his great joy he told his wife everything that had happened. But when Harpagus' son came, Astyages cut his throat and tore him limb from limb, roasted some of the flesh and boiled some, and kept it ready after he had prepared it. So when the hour for dinner came, and the rest of the guests and Harpagus were present, Astyages and the others were served dishes of lamb's meat, but Harpagus that of his own son, all but the head and hands and feet, which lay apart, covered up in a wicker basket. And when Harpagus seemed to have eaten his fill, Astyages asked him, "Did you like your meal, Harpagus?" "Exceedingly," Harpagus answered. Then those whose job it was brought him the head of his son, and hands and feet concealed in the basket, and they stood before Harpagus, and told him to open and take what he liked. Harpagus did. He opened, and saw what was left of his son. He saw this, but mastered himself, and did not lose his composure. Astyages asked him, "Do you know what beast's meat you have eaten?" "I know," he said, "and all that the king does is pleasing." With that answer he took the remains of the meat and went home. There he meant, I suppose, after collecting everything, to bury it. Thus Astyages punished Harpagus. But to help him decide about Cyrus, he summoned the same magi who had interpreted his dream as I have said, and when they came, Astyages asked them how they had interpreted his dream. They answered as before, and said that the boy must have been made king had he lived and not died first. Then Astyages said, "The boy is safe and alive, and when he was living in the country the boys of his village made him king, and he duly did all that is done by true kings, for he assigned to each individually the roles of bodyguards and sentinels and messengers and everything else, and so ruled. And what do you think is the significance of this?" "If the boy is alive," said the Magi, "and has been made king without premeditation, then be confident on this score, and keep an untroubled heart. He will not be made king a second time. Even in our prophecies, it is often but a small thing that has been foretold, and the consequences of dreams come to nothing in the end." "I too, Magi," said Astyages, "am very much of your opinion, that the dream came true when the boy was called king, and that I have no more to fear from him. Nevertheless, consider well, and advise me what will be safest both for my house and for you." The Magi said, "O king, we too are very anxious that your sovereignty prosper, for otherwise it passes from your nation to this boy, who is a Persian, and so we Medes are enslaved and held of no account by the Persians, as we are of another blood. But while you, our countrymen, are established king, we have our share of power, and great honor is shown us by you. Thus, then, we ought by all means to watch out for you and for your sovereignty. And if at the present time we saw any danger, we would declare everything to you. But now the dream has had a trifling conclusion, and we ourselves are confident and advise you to be so also. As for this boy, send him out of your sight to the Persians and to his parents." Hearing this, Astyages was glad, and calling Cyrus, said, "My boy, I did you wrong because of a vision I had in a dream, that meant nothing. But by your own destiny you still live. Now, therefore, go to the Persians, and good luck go with you. I will send guides with you. When you get there, you will find a father and a mother unlike the cowherd Mithridates and his wife." After saying this, Astyages sent Cyrus away. When he returned to Cambyses' house, his parents received him there, and learning who he was, they welcomed him enthusiastically, for they had supposed that long ago he had been killed, and they asked him how his life had been saved. Then he told them, and said that until now he had known nothing but been very deceived, but that on the way he had heard the whole story of his misfortune. For he had thought, he said, that Astyages' cowherd was his father, but in his journey from the city his escort had told him the whole story. And he had been raised, he said, by the cowherd's wife, and he was full of her praises, and in his tale he was constantly speaking of Sino. Hearing this name, his parents circulated a story that Cyrus was suckled by a dog when exposed, thinking in this way to make the story of his salvation seem more marvelous to the Persians. This then was the beginning of that legend. But as Cyrus grew up to be the manliest and best loved of his peers, Harpagus courted him and sent him gifts, wishing to be avenged on Astyages, for he saw no hope for a private man like himself of punishing Astyages. But as he saw Cyrus growing up, he tried to make him an ally, for he likened Cyrus's misfortune to his own. Even before this, the following had been done by him. Since Astyages was harsh toward the Medes, he associated with each of the chief Medes, and persuaded them to make Cyrus their leader, and depose Astyages. So much being ready and done, Harpagus wanted to reveal his intent to Cyrus, who then lived among the Persians. But the roads were guarded, and he had no plan for sending a message but this. He carefully slit the belly of a hare, and then leaving it as it was without further harm, he put into it a paper on which he wrote what he thought best. Then he sewed up the hare's belly, and sent it to Persia by the most trusted of his servants, giving him nets to carry as if he were a huntsman. The messenger was instructed to give Cyrus the hare, and tell him by word of mouth to cut it open with his own hands, with no one else present. All this was done. Cyrus took the hare, and slit it, and read the paper which was in it. The writing was as follows: "Son of Cambyses, since the gods watch over you, otherwise you would not have prospered so. Avenge yourself now on Astyages, your murderer, for thanks to his intention you are dead, while thanks to the gods, and me, you live. I expect that long ago you heard the story of what was done concerning you, and how Astyages treated me because I did not kill you, but gave you to the cowherd. If then you will listen to me, you shall rule all the country, which is now ruled by Astyages. Persuade the Persians to rebel, and lead their army against the Medes. Then you have your wish, whether I am appointed to command the army against you, or some other notable man among the Medes, for they will of themselves revolt from Astyages, and join you, and try to pull him down. Seeing then that all is ready here, do as I say, and do it quickly." When Cyrus read this, he deliberated as to what was the shrewdest way to persuade the Persians to revolt, and what he thought to be most effective he did. Writing what he liked on a paper, he assembled the Persians, and then unfolded the paper, and declared that in it Astyages appointed him leader of the Persian armies. "Now," he said in his speech, "I command you, men of Persia, to come, each provided with a sickle." This is what Cyrus said. Now there are many tribes in Persia. Those of them that Cyrus assembled and persuaded to revolt from the Medes were the Pasargadae, the Maraphii, and the Maspii. On these all other Persians depended. The chief tribe is that of the Pasargadae. To them belongs the clan of the Achaemenidae, the royal house of Persia. The other Persian tribes are the Panthylaei, the Derusiae, and the Germanii, all tillers of the soil, and the Daei, the Mardai, the Dropitii, the Sagartii, all wandering herdsmen. So when they all came with sickles as ordered, Cyrus commanded them to reclaim in one day a thorny tract of Persia, of 2 1/4 or 2 1/2 miles each way in extent. The Persians accomplished the task appointed. Cyrus then commanded them to wash themselves and come the next day. Meanwhile, collecting his father's goats and sheep and oxen in one place, he slaughtered and prepared them as a feast for the Persian host, providing also wine and all the foods that were most suitable. When the Persians came on the next day, he had them sit and feast in a meadow. After dinner he asked them which they liked more, their task of yesterday or their present pastime. They answered that the difference was great. All yesterday they had had nothing but evil, today nothing but good. Then, taking up their word, Cyrus laid bare his whole purpose, and said, "This is your situation, men of Persia. Obey me, and you shall have these good things, and 10,000 others besides, with no toil and slavery. But if you will not obey me, you will have labors unnumbered like your toil of yesterday. Now then, do as I tell you, and win your freedom. For I think that I myself was born by a divine chance to undertake this work, and I hold you fully as good men as the Medes in war and in everything else. All this is true. Therefore revolt from Astyages quickly now." The Persians had long been discontent that the Medes ruled them, and now, having got a champion, they were glad to win their freedom. But when Astyages heard that Cyrus was about this business, he sent a messenger to summon him. Cyrus told the messenger to take back word that Astyages would see him sooner than he liked. Hearing this, Astyages armed all his Medes, and was distracted by Providence so that he forgot what he had done to Harpagus, and appointed him to command the army. So, when the Medes marched out and engaged with the Persians, those who were not in on the plan fought, while others deserted to the enemy, and most were deliberate cowards and ran. Thus the Median army was shamefully scattered. As soon as Astyages heard, he sent a threatening message to Cyrus. "Nevertheless, Cyrus shall not rejoice." And with that he took the Magi who interpreted dreams, who had persuaded him to let Cyrus go free, and impaled them. Then he armed the Medes who were left in the city, the very young and very old men. Leading these out, and engaging the Persians, he was beaten. Astyages himself was taken prisoner, and lost the Median army which he led. When Astyages was a captive, Harpagus came and exulted over him, and taunted him, and besides much other bitter mockery, he recalled his banquet, when Astyages had fed Harpagus his son's flesh, and asked Astyages what it was like to be a slave after having been a king. Fixing his gaze on Harpagus, Astyages asked, "Do you imagine that this which Cyrus has done is your work?" "It was I," said the other, "who wrote the letter. The accomplishment of the work is rightly mine." "Then," said Astyages, "you stand confessed the most foolish and most unjust man on earth, most foolish in giving another the throne which you might have had yourself, if the present business is indeed your doing, most unjust in enslaving the Medes because of that banquet, for if in any event another and not you had to possess the royal power, then in justice some Mede should have had it, not a Persian, but now you have made the Medes, who did you no harm, slaves instead of masters, and the Persians, who were the slaves, are now the masters of the Medes." Thus Astyages was deposed from his sovereignty after a reign of 35 years, and the Medes had to bow down before the Persians because of Astyages' cruelty. They had ruled all Asia beyond the Halys for 128 years, from which must be subtracted the time when the Scythians held sway. At a later time they repented of what they now did, and rebelled against Darius, but they were defeated in battle and brought back into subjection. But now, in Astyages' time, Cyrus and the Persians rose in revolt against the Medes, and from this time ruled Asia. As for Astyages, Cyrus did him no further harm, and kept him in his own house until Astyages died. This is the story of the birth and upbringing of Cyrus, and of how he became king, and afterwards, as I have already related, he subjugated Croesus in punishment for the unprovoked wrong done him, and after this victory he became sovereign of all Asia. As to the customs of the Persians, I know them to be these. It is not their custom to make and set up statues and temples and altars, but those who do such things they think foolish, because, I suppose, they have never believed the gods to be like men, as the Greeks do. But they call the whole circuit of heaven Zeus, and to him they sacrifice on the highest peaks of the mountains. They sacrifice also to the sun and moon and earth and fire and water and winds. From the beginning, these are the only gods to whom they have ever sacrificed. They learned later to sacrifice to the heavenly Aphrodite from the Assyrians and Arabians. She is called by the Assyrians Mylitta, by the Arabians Alilat, by the Persians Mitra. And this is their method of sacrifice to the aforesaid gods. When about to sacrifice, they do not build altars or kindle fire, employ libations or music or fillets or barley meal. When a man wishes to sacrifice to one of the gods, he leads a beast to an open space, and then, wearing a wreath on his tiara, of myrtle usually, calls on the god. To pray for blessings of himself alone is not lawful for the sacrificer. Rather, he prays that the king and all the Persians be well, for he reckons himself among them. He then cuts the victim limb from limb into portions, and, after boiling the flesh, spreads the softest grass, trefoil usually, and places all of it on this. When he has so arranged it, a magus comes near and chants over it the song of the birth of the gods, as the Persian tradition relates it, for no sacrifice can be offered without a magus. Then after a little while the sacrificer carries away the flesh and uses it as he pleases. The day which every man values most is his own birthday. On this day he thinks it right to serve a more abundant meal than on other days. Oxen or horses or camels or asses, roasted whole in ovens, are set before the rich. The poorer serve the lesser kinds of cattle. Their courses are few, the dainties that follow many, and not all served together. This is why the Persians say of Greeks that they rise from table still hungry. because not much dessert is set before them. Were this, too, given to Greeks, the Persians say, they would never stop eating. They are very partial to wine. No one may vomit or urinate in another's presence. This is prohibited among them. Moreover, it is their custom to deliberate about the gravest matters when they are drunk, and what they approve in their deliberations is proposed to them the next day, when they are sober, by the master of the house where they deliberate. And if, being sober, they still approve it, they act on it, but if not, they drop it. And if they have deliberated about a matter when sober, they decide upon it when they are drunk. When one man meets another on the road, it is easy to see if the two are equals, for if they are, they kiss each other on the lips without speaking. If the difference in rank is small, the cheek is kissed. If it is great, the humbler bows and does obeisance to the other. They honor most of all those who live nearest them, next those who are next nearest, and so going ever onwards, they assign honor by this rule. Those who dwell farthest off they hold least honorable of all, for they think that they are themselves in all regards by far the best of all men, that the rest have only a proportionate claim to merit, until those who live farthest away have least merit of all. Under the rule of the Medes, one tribe would even govern another. The Medes held sway over all alike, and especially over those who lived nearest to them. These ruled their neighbors, and the neighbors in turn those who came next to them, on the same scheme by which the Persians assign honor, for the nation kept advancing its rule and dominion. But the Persians, more than all men, welcome foreign customs. They wear the Median dress, thinking it more beautiful than their own, and the Egyptian cuirass in war. Their luxurious practices are of all kinds, and all borrowed. The Greeks taught them pederasty. Every Persian marries many lawful wives, and keeps still more concubines. After valor in battle, it is accounted noble to father the greatest number of sons. The king sends gifts yearly to him who gets most. Strength, they believe, is in numbers. They educate their boys from 5 to 20 years old, and teach them only 3 things: writing, and archery, and honesty. A boy is not seen by his father before he is 5 years old, but lives with the women. The point of this is that if the boy should die in the interval of his rearing, the father would suffer no grief. This is a law which I praise, and it is a praiseworthy law, too, which does not allow the king himself to slay any one for a single offense, or any other Persian to do incurable harm to one of his servants for one offense. Not until an accounting shows that an offender's wrongful acts are more and greater than his services may a man give rein to his anger. They say that no one has ever yet killed his father or mother. When such a thing has been done, it always turns out on inquest that the Dover is shown to be a changeling or the fruit of adultery, for it is not to be believed, say they, that a son should kill his true parent. Furthermore, of what they may not do, they may not speak, either. They hold lying to be the most disgraceful thing of all, and next to that, debt, for which they have many other reasons, but this in particular. It is inevitable, so they say, that the debtor also speaks some falsehood. The citizen who has leprosy or the white sickness may not come into town or mingle with other Persians. They say that he is so afflicted because he has sinned in some way against the sun. Every stranger who gets such a disease, many drive out of the country, and they do the same to white doves, for the reason given. Rivers they especially revere. They will neither urinate, nor spit, nor wash their hands in them, nor let anyone else do so. There is another thing that always happens among them. We have noted it, although the Persians have not. Their names, which agree with the nature of their persons and their nobility, all end in the same letter, that which the Dorians call san, and the Ionians sigma. You will find, if you search, that not some, but all Persian names alike end in this letter. So much I can say of them from my own certain knowledge. But there are other matters concerning the dead which are secretly and obscurely told, how the dead bodies of Persians are not buried before they have been mangled by birds or dogs. That this is the way of the Magi I know for certain, for they do not conceal the practice. But this is certain, that before the Persians bury the body in the earth, they embalm it in wax. These Magi are as unlike the priests of Egypt as they are unlike all other men, for the priests consider it sacrilege to kill anything that lives except what they sacrifice, but the Magi kill with their own hands every creature, except dogs and men. They kill all alike, ants and snakes, creeping and flying things, and take great pride in it, leaving this custom to be such as it has been from the first. I return now to my former story. End of Book 1, Part 7.
Histories, Volume 1, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by A.D. Godley. Book 1, Part 8, paragraphs 141 to 163. As soon as the Lydians had been subjugated by the Persians, the Ionians and Aeolians sent messengers to Cyrus, offering to be his subjects on the same terms as those which they had under Croesus. After hearing what they proposed, Cyrus told them a story. Once, he said, there was a flute player who saw fish in the sea and played upon his flute, thinking that they would come out onto the land. Disappointed of his hope, he cast a net and gathered it in, and took out a great multitude of fish, and seeing them leaping, "You had best," he said, "stop your dancing now. You would not come out and dance before, when I played to you." The reason why Cyrus told the story to the Ionians and Aeolians was that the Ionians, who were ready to obey him when the victory was won, had before refused when he sent a message asking them to revolt from Croesus. So he answered them in anger. But when the message came to the Ionians in their cities, they fortified themselves with walls, and assembled in the Panionian, all except the Milesians, with whom alone Cyrus made a treaty on the same terms as that which they had with the Lydians. The rest of the Ionians resolved to send envoys in the name of them all to Sparta, to ask help for the Ionians. Now these Ionians possessed the Panionian, and of all men whom we know, they happened to found their cities in places with the loveliest of climate and seasons. For neither to the north of them nor to the south does the land effect the same thing as in Ionia, nor to the east nor to the west, affected here by the cold and wet, there by the heat and drought. They do not all have the same speech, but 4 different dialects. Miletus lies farthest south among them, and next to it come Myus and Priene. These are settlements in Caria, and they have a common language. Ephesus, Colophon, Lebedos, Teos, Cladzomene, Phocea, all of them in Lydia, have a language in common which is wholly different from the speech of the 3 former cities. There are yet 3 Ionian cities, 2 of them situated on the islands of Samos and Chios, and 1, Erythrae, on the mainland. The Chians and Erythraeans speak alike, but the Samians have a language which is their own and no one else's. It is thus seen that there are 4 modes of speech. Among these Ionians the Milesians were safe from the danger, for they had made a treaty, and the islanders among them had nothing to fear, for the Phoenicians were not yet subjects of the Persians, nor were the Persians themselves mariners. But those of Asia were cut off from the rest of the Ionians only in the way that I shall show. The whole Hellenic stock was then small, and the last of all its branches and the least regarded was the Ionian, for it had no considerable city except Athens. Now the Athenians and the rest would not be called Ionians, but spurned the name. Even now the greater number of them seem to me to be ashamed of it, But the 12 cities aforesaid gloried in this name, and founded a holy place for themselves, which they called the Pan-Ionian, and agreed among themselves to allow no other Ionians to use it, nor in fact did any except the men of Smyrna ask to be admitted. Just as the Dorians of what is now the country of the 5 cities, formerly the country of the 6 cities, forbid admitting any of the neighbouring Dorians to the Triopian temple, and even barred from using it those of their own group who had broken the temple law. For long ago, in the games in honour of Triopian Apollo, they offered certain bronze tripods to the victors, and those who won these were not to carry them away from the temple, but dedicate them there to the god. Now when a man of Halicarnassus called Agasicles won, he disregarded this law, and carrying the tripod away, nailed it to the wall of his own house. For this offence the 5 cities, Lindus, Ialysus, Camyrus, Cos, and Cnidus, forbade the 6th city, Halicarnassus, to share in the use of the temple. Such was the penalty imposed on the Halicarnassians. As for the Ionians, the reason why they made 12 cities and would admit no more was, in my judgment, this. There were 12 divisions of them when they dwelt in the Peloponnese, just as there are 12 divisions of the Achaeans who drove the Ionians out. Pellene nearest to Sicyon, then Egira and Aegae, where is the never-failing river Crathis, from which the river in Italy took its name. Bura and Helice, where the Ionians fled when they were worsted in battle by the Achaeans, Aegion, Rhipe, Patri, Pharii, and Olenus, where is the great river Pyrrhus, Dyme, and Tritii, the only inland city of all these. These were the 12 divisions of the Ionians, as they are now of the Achaeans. For this reason, and for no other, the Ionians too made 12 cities. For it would be foolishness to say that these are more truly Ionian or better born than the other Ionians, since not the least part of them are Abantes from Euboea, who are not Ionians even in name, and there are mingled with them Minyans of Orchomenus, Cadmeans, Dryopians, Phocian renegades from their nation, Molossians, Pelasgian Arcadians, Dorians of Epidaurus, and many other tribes. And as for those who came from the very town hall of Athens, and think they are the best born of the Ionians, these did not bring wives with them to their settlements, but married Carian women whose parents they had put to death. For this slaughter these women made a custom, and bound themselves by oath, and enjoined it on their daughters, that no one would sit at table with her husband, or call him by his name, because the men had married them after slaying their fathers and husbands and sons. This happened at Miletus. And as kings some of them chose Lycian descendants of Glaucus, son of Hippolochus, and some Corcones of Pylus, descendants of Codrus, son of Melanthus, and some both. Yet since they set more store by the name than the rest of the Ionians, let it be granted that those of pure birth are Ionians, and all are Ionians who are of Athenian descent and keep the feast Aperturia. All do keep it, except the men of Ephesus and Colophon. These are the only Ionians who do not keep it, and these because, they say, of a certain pretext of murder. The Pan-Ionian is a sacred ground in Mycale, facing north. It was set apart for Poseidon of Helicon by the joint will of the Ionians. Mycale is a western promontory of the mainland opposite Samos. The Ionians used to assemble there from their cities and keep the festival to which they gave the name of Pan-Ionia. Not only the Ionian festivals, but all those of all the Greeks alike, end in the same letter, just as do the names of the Persians. Those are the Ionian cities, and these are the Aeolian. Cyme, called Friconian, Larice, Neontychos, Temnos, Scylla, Notion, Egiroessa, Pitani, Aegii, Myrina, Grainaia. These are the ancient Aeolian cities, 11 in number, but one of them, Smyrna, was taken away by the Ionians, for these too were once 12 on the mainland. These Aeolians had settled where the land was better than the Ionian territory, but the climate was not so good. Now this is how the Aeolians lost Smyrna. Some men of Colophon, the losers in civil strife, and exiles from their country, had been received by them into the town. These Colophonian exiles waited for the time when the men of Smyrna were holding a festival to Dionysus outside the walls. Then they shut the gates, and so got the city. Then all the Aeolians came to recover it, and an agreement was made whereby the Aeolians would receive back their movable goods from the Ionians, and leave the city. After this was done, the other 11 cities divided the Smyrnians among themselves, and made them citizens of their own. These then are the Aeolian cities on the mainland, besides those that are situated on Ida and are separate. Among those on the islands, 5 divide Lesbos among them. There was a 6th on Lesbos, Arisba, but its people were enslaved by their kinfolk of Methymna. There is one on Tenedos, and one again in the 100 Isles, as they are called. The men of Lesbos and Tenedos, then, like the Ionian islanders, had nothing to fear. The rest of the cities deliberated together, and decided to follow the Ionians' lead. So when the envoys of the Ionians and Aeolians came to Sparta, for they set about this in haste, they chose a Phocian, whose name was Pythermus, to speak for all. He then put on a purple cloak, so that as many Spartans as possible might assemble to hear him, and stood up and made a long speech asking aid for his people. But the Lacedaemonians would not listen to him, and refused to help the Ionians. So the Ionians departed, but the Lacedaemonians, though they had rejected their envoys, did nevertheless send men in a ship of 50 oars to see, as I suppose, the situation with Cyrus and Ionia. These, after coming to Phocea, sent Lacrynes, who was the most esteemed among them, to Sardis, to repeat there to Cyrus a proclamation of the Lacedaemonians, that he was to harm no city on Greek territory, or else the Lacedaemonians would punish him. When the herald had proclaimed this, Cyrus is said to have asked the Greeks who were present who and how many in number these Lacedaemonians were who made this declaration. When he was told, he said to the Spartan herald, "I never yet feared men who set apart a place in the middle of their city, where they perjure themselves and deceive each other. They, if I keep my health, shall talk of their own misfortunes, not those of the Ionians." He uttered this threat against all the Greeks, because they have markets and buy and sell there, for the Persians themselves were not used to resorting to markets at all, nor do they even have a market of any kind. Presently, entrusting Sardis to a Persian called Tabulus, and instructing Pacches, a Lydian, to take charge of the gold of Croesus and the Lydians, he himself marched away to Ecbatana, taking Croesus with him, and at first taking no notice of the Ionians. For he had Babylon on his hands, and the Bactrian nation, and the Saci and Egyptians. He meant to lead the army against these himself, and to send another commander against the Ionians. But no sooner had Cyrus marched away from Sardis than Pacches made the Lydians revolt from Tabulus and Cyrus, and he went down to the sea, where, as he had all the gold of Sardis, he hired soldiers, and persuaded the men of the coast to join his undertaking. Then, marching to Sardis, he penned Tabulus in the Acropolis, and besieged him there. When Cyrus heard of this on his journey, he said to Croesus, "What end to this business, Croesus?" It seems that the Lydians will never stop making trouble for me and for themselves. It occurs to me that it may be best to make slaves of them, for it seems I have acted like one who slays the father and spares the children. So likewise I have taken with me you, who were more than a father to the Lydians, and handed the city over to the Lydians themselves, and then indeed I marvel that they revolt." So Cyrus uttered his thought, but Croesus feared that he would destroy Sardis, and answered him thus: "O king, what you say is reasonable. But do not ever yield to anger, or destroy an ancient city that is innocent both of the former and of the present offense. For the former I am responsible, and bear the punishment on my head, while Pacches, in whose charge you left Sardis, does this present wrong. Let him then pay the penalty. But pardon the Lydians, and give them this command, so that they not revolt or pose a danger to you. Send and forbid them to possess weapons of war, and order them to wear tunics under their cloaks and knee boots on their feet, and to teach their sons lyre-playing and song and dance and shopkeeping. And quickly, O king, you shall see them become women instead of men, so that you need not fear them, that they might revolt." Croesus proposed this to him, because he thought this was better for the Lydians than to be sold as slaves. He knew that without some reasonable plea he could not change the king's mind, and feared that even if the Lydians should escape this time, they might later revolt and be destroyed by the Persians. Cyrus was pleased by this counsel. He relented in his anger, and said he would follow Croesus' advice. Then, calling Mazares a Mede, he told him to give the Lydians the commands that Croesus advised; further, to enslave all the others who had joined the Lydians in attacking Sardis, and as for Pacches himself, by all means to bring him into his presence alive. After giving these commands on his journey, he marched away into the Persian country. But Pacches, learning that an army sent against him was approaching, was frightened, and fled to Cyme. Mazares the Mede, when he came to Sardis with the part that he had of Cyrus' host, and found Pacches' followers no longer there, first of all compelled the Lydians to carry out Cyrus' commands, and by his order they changed their whole way of life. After this he sent messengers to Cyme, demanding that Pacches be surrendered. The Cymeans resolved to make the god at Branchide their judge as to what course they should take, for there was an ancient place of divination there, which all the Ionians and Aeolians used to consult. The place is in the land of Miletus, above the harbour of Panormus. The men of Cyme then sent to Branchide to inquire of the shrine what they should do in the matter of Pacches that would be most pleasing to the gods. And the oracle replied that they must surrender Pacches to the Persians. When this answer came back to them, they set about surrendering him. But while the greater part were in favour of doing this, Aristodicus, son of Heraclides, a notable man among the citizens, stopped the men of Cyme from doing it, for he did not believe the oracle, and thought that those who had inquired of the gods spoke falsely, until at last a second band of inquirers was sent to inquire concerning Pacches, among whom was Aristodicus. When they came to Branchide, Aristodicus, speaking for all, put this question to the oracle: "Lord, Pacches the Lydian has come to us a suppliant, fleeing a violent death at the hands of the Persians, and they demand him of us, telling the men of Cyme to surrender him. But we, as much as we fear the Persian power, have not dared give up this suppliant of ours until it is clearly made known to us by you whether we are to do this or not." Thus Aristodicus inquired, and the god again gave the same answer, that Pacches should be surrendered to the Persians. With that Aristodicus did as he had already decided. He went around the temple and took away the sparrows and all the families of nesting birds that were in it. But while he was doing so, a voice, they say, came out of the inner shrine, calling to Aristodicus and saying, "Vilest of men, how dare you do this? Will you rob my temple of those that take refuge with me?" Then Aristodicus had his answer ready. "Lord," he said, "will you save your own suppliants, yet tell the men of Cyme to deliver up theirs?" But the god replied, "Yes, I do command them, so that you may perish all the sooner for your impiety, and never again come to inquire of my oracle about giving up those that seek refuge with you." When the Cymeans heard this answer, they sent Pacches away to Mytilene, for they were anxious not to perish for delivering him up, or to be besieged for keeping him with them. Then Mazares sent a message to Mytilene demanding the surrender of Pacches, and the Mytileneans prepared to give him for a price. I cannot say exactly how much it was, for the bargain was never fulfilled. For when the Cymeans learned what the Mytileneans were about, they sent a ship to Lesbos and took Pacches away to Chios. From there he was dragged out of the temple of city-guarding Athena and delivered up by the Chians, who received in return Atarneus, which is a district in Mysia opposite Lesbos. The Persians thus received Pacches and kept him guarded, so that they might show him to Cyrus. And for a long time no one would use barley meal from this land of Atarneus in sacrifices to any god, or make sacrificial cakes of what grew there. Everything that came from that country was kept away from any sacred rite. The Chians then surrendered Pacches, and afterwards Mazares led his army against those who had helped to besiege Tabalus, and he enslaved the people of Priene, and overran the plain of the Meandrus, giving it to his army to pillage, and Magnesia likewise. Immediately after this he died of an illness. After his death, Harpagus, a Mede like Mazares, came down to succeed him in his command. This is the Harpagus who was entertained by Astyages, the king of the Medes, at that unnatural feast, and who helped win the kingship for Cyrus. This man was now made general by Cyrus. When he came to Ionia, he took the cities by means of earthworks. He would drive the men within their walls, and then build earthworks against the walls, and so take the cities. Phocea was the first Ionian town that he attacked. These Phoceans were the earliest of the Greeks to make long sea voyages, and it was they who discovered the Adriatic Sea and Tyrrhenia and Iberia and Tartessus, not sailing in round freight ships, but in 50 oared vessels. When they came to Tartessus, they made friends with the king of the Tartessians, whose name was Arganthonius. He ruled Tartessus for 80 years, and lived 120. The Phoceans won this man's friendship to such a degree that he invited them to leave Ionia and settle in his country wherever they liked. And then, when he could not persuade them to, and learned from them how the Median power was increasing, he gave them money to build a wall around their city. He gave it generously, for the circuit of the wall is of not a few stades, and all this is made of great stones well fitted together. End of Book 1, Part 8. Recording by Graham Redman. By Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by A.D. Godley. Book 1, Part 9, paragraphs 164 to 185. In such a manner the Phoceans' wall was built. Harpagus marched against the city and besieged it, but he made overtures and said that it would suffice him if the Phocaeans would demolish one rampart of the wall and dedicate one house. But the Phocaeans, very indignant at the thought of slavery, said they wanted to deliberate for a day, and then they would answer. But while they were deliberating, Harpagus must withdraw his army from the walls, they said. Harpagus said that he well knew what they intended to do, but that nevertheless he would allow them to deliberate. So when Harpagus withdrew his army from the walls, the Phocaeans launched their 50 oared ships, embarked their children and women and all their movable goods, besides the statues from the temples and everything dedicated in them, except bronze or stonework or painting, and then embarked themselves and set sail for Chios. And the Persians took Phocea, left thus uninhabited. The Phocaeans would have bought the islands called Inusi from the Chians, but the Chians would not sell them, because they feared that the islands would become a market, and so their own island be cut off from trade. So the Phocaeans prepared to sail to Cyrus, where, at the command of an oracle, they had built a city called Eulalia 20 years before. Arganthonius was by this time dead. While getting ready for their voyage, they first sailed to Phocea, where they destroyed the Persian guard to whom Harpagus had entrusted the defence of the city, and when this was done, they called down mighty curses on any one of them who should stay behind when the rest sailed. Not only this, but they sank a mass of iron in the sea, and swore never to return to Phocea before the iron should appear again. But while they prepared to sail to Cyrus, more than half of the citizens were overcome with longing and pitiful sorrow for the city and the life of their land, and they broke their oath and sailed back to Phocea. Those of them who kept the oath put out to sea from the Inusi. And when they came to Cyrus, they lived there for 5 years as one community with those who had come first, and they founded temples there. But they harassed and plundered all their neighbours, as a result of which the Tyrrhenians and Carthaginians made common cause against them, and sailed to attack them with 60 ships each. The Phocaeans also manned their ships, 60 in number, and met the enemy in the sea called Sardonian. They engaged, and the Phocaeans won, yet it was only a kind of Cadmean victory, for they lost 40 of their ships, and the 20 that remained were useless, their rams twisted awry. Then, sailing to Eulalia, they took their children and women and all of their possessions that their ships could hold on board, and leaving Cyrus, they sailed to Rhegium. As for the crews of the disabled ships, the Carthaginians and Tyrrhenians drew lots for them, and of the Tyrrhenians the Agilaioi were allotted by far the majority, and these they led out and stoned to death. But afterwards everything from Agila that passed the place where the stoned Phocaeans lay, whether sheep or beasts of burden or men, became distorted and crippled and palsied. The Agileans sent to Delphi wanting to mend their offence, and the Pythian priestess told them to do what the people of Agila do to this day, for they pay great honours to the Phocaeans with religious rites and games and horse races. Such was the end of this part of the Phocaeans. Those of them who fled to Rhegium set out from there and gained possession of that city in the Oenotrian country, which is now called Hyele. They founded this because they learned from a man of Posidonia that the Cyanus whose establishment the Pythian priestess ordained was the hero, and not the island. Thus then it went with the Ionian Phocea. The Tians did the same things as the Phocaeans. When Harpagus had taken their walled city by building an earthwork, they all embarked aboard ship and sailed away for Thrace. There they founded a city, Abdera, which before this had been founded by Timesius of Clazomene. Yet he got no profit of it, but was driven out by the Thracians. This Timesius is now honoured as a hero by the Tians of Abdera. These were the only Ionians who left their native lands unable to endure slavery. The rest of the Ionians, except the Milesians, though they faced Harpagus in battle as did the exiles, and conducted themselves well, each fighting for his own country, yet when they were defeated and their cities taken, they remained where they were and did as they were told. The Milesians, as I have already said, made a treaty with Cyrus himself and struck no blow. Thus Ionia was enslaved for the second time, and when Harpagus had conquered the Ionians of the mainland, the Ionians of the islands, fearing the same fate, surrendered to Cyrus. When the Ionians, despite their evil plight, nonetheless assembled at the Panionion, Bias of Priene, I have learned, gave them very useful advice, and had they followed it, they might have been the most prosperous of all Greeks. For he advised them to put out to sea and sail all together to Sardo, and then found one city for all Ionians. Thus, possessing the greatest island in the world and ruling others, they would be rid of slavery and have prosperity. But if they stayed in Ionia, he could see, he said, no hope of freedom for them. This was the advice which Bias of Priene gave after the destruction of the Ionians, and that given before the destruction by Thales of Miletus, a Phoenician by descent, was good too. He advised that the Ionians have one place of deliberation, and that it be in Teos, for that was the centre of Ionia, and that the other cities be considered no more than demes. Harpagus, after subjugating Ionia, made an expedition against the Carians, Cornians, and Lycians, taking Ionians and Aeolians with him. Of these, the Carians have come to the mainland from the islands, for in the past they were islanders, called Leleges, and under the rule of Minos, not, as far as I can learn by report, paying tribute, but manning ships for him when he needed them. Since Minos had subjected a good deal of territory for himself, and was victorious in war, this made the Carians too at that time by far the most respected of all nations. They invented 3 things in which they were followed by the Greeks. It was the Carians who originated wearing crests on their helmets and devices on their shields, and who first made grips for their shields. Until then, all who used shields carried them without these grips, and guided them with leather belts which they slung round the neck and over the left shoulder. Then, a long time afterwards, the Carians were driven from the islands by Dorians and Ionians, and so came to the mainland. This is the Cretan story about the Carians, but the Carians themselves do not subscribe to it, but believe that they are aboriginal inhabitants of the mainland, and always bore the name which they bear now, and they point to an ancient shrine of Carian Zeus at Mylassa, to which Mysians and Lydians, as brethren of the Carians, for Lydus and Mysus, they say, were brothers of Car, are admitted, but not those who spoke the same language as the Carians, but were of another people. I think the Cornians are aborigines of the soil, but they say that they came from Crete. Their speech has become like the Carian, or the Carian like theirs, for I cannot clearly decide. But in their customs they diverge widely from the Carians, as from all other men. Their chief pleasure is to assemble for drinking bouts in groups according to their ages and friendships, men, women, and children. Certain foreign rites of worship were established among them, but afterwards, when they were inclined otherwise and wanted to worship only the gods of their fathers, all Cornian men of full age put on their armour and went together as far as the boundaries of Calinda, striking the air with their spears and saying that they were casting out the alien gods. Such are their ways. The Lycians were from Crete in ancient times, for in the past none that lived on Crete were Greek. Now there was a dispute in Crete about the royal power between Sarpedon and Minos, sons of Europa. Minos prevailed in this dispute, and drove out Sarpedon and his partisans, who after being driven out came to the Mylian land in Asia. What is now possessed by the Lycians was in the past Mylian, and the Mylians were then called Solymi. For a while Sarpedon ruled them, and the people were called Termili, which was the name that they had brought with them, and that is still given to the Lycians by their neighbours. But after Lycus, son of Pandion, came from Athens, banished as well by his brother Aegeus, to join Sarpedon in the land of the Termili, they came in time to be called Lycians after Lycus. Their customs are partly Cretan and partly Carian, but they have one which is their own and shared by no other men. They take their names not from their fathers but from their mothers, and when one is asked by his neighbour who he is, he will say that he is the son of such a mother, and rehearse the mothers of his mother. Indeed, if a female citizen marries a slave, her children are considered pure-blooded. But if a male citizen, even the most prominent of them, takes an alien wife or concubine, the children are dishonoured. Neither the Carians nor any Greeks who dwell in this country did anything notable before they were all enslaved by Harpagus. Among those who inhabit it are certain Cnidians, colonists from Lacedaemon. Their country, it is called the Triopian, lies between the sea and that part of the peninsula which belongs to Bubassus, and all but a small part of the Cnidian territory is washed by the sea, for it is bounded on the north by the Gulf of Ceramicus, and on the south by the sea of Cyme and Rhodes. Now while Harpagus was conquering Ionia, the Cnidians dug a trench across this little space, which is about 2/3 of a mile wide, in order that their country might be an island. So they brought it all within the entrenchment, for the frontier between the Cnidian country and the mainland is on the isthmus across which they dug. Many of them were at this work, and seeing that the workers were injured when breaking stones more often and less naturally than usual, some in other ways, but most in the eyes, the Cnidians sent envoys to Delphi to inquire what it was that opposed them. Then, as they themselves say, the priestess gave them this answer in iambic verse: "Do not wall or trench the isthmus. Zeus would have given you an island if he had wanted to." At this answer from the priestess, the Cnidians stopped their digging, and when Harpagus came against them with his army, they surrendered to him without resistance. There were Pedaceans dwelling inland above Halicarnassus. When any misfortune was approaching them or their neighbours, the priestess of Athena grew a long beard. This had happened to them thrice. These were the only men near Caria who held out for long against Harpagus, and they gave him the most trouble. They fortified a hill called Lydia. The Pedaceans were at length taken, and when Harpagus led his army into the plain of Xanthus, the Lycians came out to meet him, and showed themselves courageous, fighting few against many, but being beaten and driven into the city, they gathered their wives and children and goods and servants into the Acropolis, and then set the whole Acropolis on fire. Then they swore great oaths to each other, and sallying out fell fighting all the men of Xanthus. Of the Xanthians who claim now to be Lycians, the greater number, all except 80 households, are of foreign descent. These 80 families, as it happened, were away from the city at that time, and thus survived. So Harpagus gained Xanthus, and Cornus too in a somewhat similar manner, the Cornians following for the most part the example of the Lycians. Harpagus then made havoc of Lower Asia, In the upper country, Cyrus himself vanquished every nation, leaving none untouched. Of the greater part of these I will say nothing, but will speak only of those which gave Cyrus the most trouble, and are most worthy of being described. When Cyrus had made all the mainland submit to him, he attacked the Assyrians. In Assyria there are many other great cities, but the most famous and the strongest was Babylon, where the royal dwelling had been established after the destruction of Ninus. Babylon was a city such as I will now describe. It lies in a great plain, and is in shape a square, each side 15 miles in length. Thus 60 miles make the complete circuit of the city. Such is the size of the city of Babylon, and it was planned like no other city of which we know. Around it runs first a moat deep and wide and full of water, and then a wall 83 feet thick and 333 feet high. The royal measure is greater by 3 fingers' breadth than the common measure. Further, I must relate where the earth was used as it was dug from the moat, and how the wall was constructed. As they dug the moat, they made bricks of the earth which was carried out of the place they dug, and when they had moulded bricks enough, they baked them in ovens. Then, using hot bitumen for cement, and interposing layers of wattled reeds at every 30th course of bricks, they built first the border of the moat, and then the wall itself in the same fashion. On the top, along the edges of the wall, they built houses of a single room facing each other, with space enough between to drive a 4-horse chariot. There are 100 gates in the circuit of the wall, all of bronze, with posts and lintels of the same. There is another city called Is, 8 days' journey from Babylon, where there is a little river, also named Is, a tributary of the Euphrates River. From the source of this river Is, many lumps of bitumen rise with the water, and from there the bitumen was brought for the wall of Babylon. Thus, then, this wall was built. The city is divided into 2 parts, for it is cut in half by a river named Euphrates, a wide, deep, and swift river, flowing from Armenia and issuing into the Red Sea. The angles of the wall, then, on either side, are built quite down to the river. Here they turn, and from here a fence of baked bricks runs along each bank of the stream. The city itself is full of houses 3 and 4 stories high, and the ways that traverse it, those that run crosswise towards the river and the rest, are all straight. Further, at the end of each road there was a gate in the riverside fence, 1 gate for each alley. These gates also were of bronze, and these too opened on the river. These walls are the city's outer armour. Within them there is another encircling wall, nearly as strong as the other, but narrower. In the middle of one division of the city stands the royal palace, surrounded by a high and strong wall, and in the middle of the other is still to this day the sacred enclosure of Zeus Belus, a square of 440 yards each way, with gates of bronze. In the centre of this sacred enclosure a solid tower has been built, 220 yards long and broad. A second tower rises from this, and from it yet another, until at last there are 8. The way up them mounts spirally outside the height of the towers. About halfway up is a resting place, with seats for repose, where those who ascend sit down and rest. In the last tower there is a great shrine, and in it stands a great and well-covered couch, and a golden table near by. But no image has been set up in the shrine, nor does any human creature lie there for the night, except one native woman, chosen from all women by the god, as the Chaldeans say, who are priests of this god. These same Chaldeans say, though I do not believe them, that the god himself is accustomed to visit the shrine and rest on the couch, as in Thebes of Egypt, as the Egyptians say. For there too a woman sleeps in the temple of Theban Zeus, and neither the Egyptian nor the Babylonian woman, it is said, has intercourse with men, and as does the prophetess of the god at Patara in Lycia, whenever she is appointed. For there is not always a place of divination there, but when she is appointed, she is shut up in the temple during the night. In the Babylonian temple there is another shrine below, where there is a great golden image of Zeus sitting at a great golden table, and the footstool and the chair are also gold. The gold of the whole was said by the Chaldeans to be 800 talents weight. Outside the temple is a golden altar. There is also another great altar, on which are sacrificed the full grown of the flocks. Only nurslings may be sacrificed on the golden altar, but on the greater altar the Chaldeans even offer 1,000 talents weight of frankincense yearly, when they keep the festival of this god. And in the days of Cyrus there was still in this sacred enclosure a statue of solid gold 20 feet high. I myself have not seen it, but I relate what is told by the Chaldeans. Darius, son of Hystaspes, proposed to take this statue, but dared not. Xerxes his son took it, and killed the priest who warned him not to move the statue. Such is the furniture of this temple, and there are many private offerings besides. Now among the many rulers of this city of Babylon, whom I shall mention in my Assyrian history, who finished the building of the walls and the temples, there were 2 that were women. The first of these lived 5 generations earlier than the second, and her name was Semiramis. It was she who built dikes on the plain, a notable work. Before that the whole plain used to be flooded by the river. The second queen, whose name was Nitocris, was a wiser woman than the first. She left such monuments as I shall record, and moreover, seeing that the kingdom of Media was great and restless, and Ninus itself among other cities had fallen to it, she took such precautions as she could for her protection. First she dealt with the river Euphrates, which flows through the middle of her city. This had been straight before, but by digging canals higher up, she made the river so crooked that its course now passes one of the Assyrian villages 3 times. The village which is so approached by the Euphrates is called Arderika. And now those who travel from our sea to Babylon must spend 3 days as they float down the Euphrates, coming 3 times to the same village. Such was this work, and she built an embankment along either shore of the river, marvellous for its greatness and height. Then, a long way above Babylon, she dug the reservoir of a lake, a little way off from the river, always digging deep enough to find water, and making the circumference a distance of 52 miles. What was dug out of this hole she used to embank either edge of the river, and when she had it all dug, she brought stones and made a quay all around the lake. Her purpose in making the river wind and turning the hole into marsh was this, that the current might be slower because of the many windings that broke its force, and that the passages to Babylon might be crooked, and that right after them should come also the long circuit of the lake. All this work was done in that part of the country where the passes are and the shortest road from Media, so that the Medes might not mix with her people and learn of her affairs. End of Book 1, Part 9. Recording by Graham Redman. Book 1, Part 10 of Herodotus Histories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. Histories, Volume 1, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by A.D. Godley. Book 1, Part 10, paragraphs 186 to 216. So she made the deep river her protection, and this work led to another which she added to it. Her city was divided into two parts by the river that flowed through the middle. In the days of the former rulers, when one wanted to go from one part to the other, one had to cross in a boat, and this, I suppose, was a nuisance. But the queen also provided for this. She made another monument of her reign out of this same work when the digging of the basin of the lake was done. She had very long blocks of stone cut, and when these were ready and the place was dug, she turned the course of the river into it, and while it was filling, the former channel now being dry, she bricked the borders of the river in the city, and the descent from the gate leading down to the river, with baked bricks, like those of the wall. And near the middle of the city she built a bridge with the stones that had been dug up, binding them together with iron and lead. Each morning she laid square-hewn logs across it, on which the Babylonians crossed. But these logs were removed at night, lest folk always be crossing over and stealing from one another. Then, when the basin she had made for a lake was filled by the river, and the bridge was finished, Nitocris brought the Euphrates back to its former channel out of the lake. Thus she had served her purpose, as she thought, by making a swamp of the basin, and her citizens had a bridge made for them. There was a trick, too, that this same queen contrived. She had a tomb made for herself, and set high over the very gate of that entrance of the city which was used most, with writing engraved on the tomb, which read, "If any king of Babylon in the future is in need of money, let him open this tomb, and take as much as he likes. But let him not open it unless he is in need, for it will be the worse for him." This tomb remained untouched until the kingship fell to Darius. He thought it a very strange thing that he should never use this gate, or take the money when it lay there, and the writing itself invited him to. The reason he did not use the gate was that the dead body would be over his head as he passed through. After opening the tomb, he found no money there, only the dead body, with writing which read, "If you were ever satisfied with what you had, and did not disgrace yourself seeking more, you would not have opened the coffins of the dead." Such a woman, it is recorded, was this queen. Cyrus, then, marched against Nitocris' son, who inherited the name of his father Labynetus and the sovereignty of Assyria. Now when the great king campaigns, he marches well provided with food and flocks from home, and water from the Coaspes river that flows past Susa is carried with him, the only river from which the king will drink. This water of the Coaspes is boiled, and very many four-wheeled wagons drawn by mules carry it in silver vessels, following the king wherever he goes at any time. When Cyrus reached the Gyndes River on his march to Babylon, which rises in the mountains of the Mattiinae, and flows through the Dardanian country into another river, the Tigris, that again passes the city of Opis, and empties into the Red Sea, when, I say, Cyrus tried to cross the Gyndes, which was navigable there, one of his sacred white horses dashed recklessly into the river trying to get through it, but the current overwhelmed him and swept him under and away. At this violence of the river Cyrus was very angry, and he threatened to make it so feeble that women could ever after cross it easily without wetting their knees. After uttering this threat, he paused in his march against Babylon, and, dividing his army into two parts, drew lines, planning out 180 canals running every way from either bank of the Ganges. Then he organized his army along the lines and made them dig. Since a great multitude was at work, it went quickly, but they spent the whole summer there before it was finished. Then, at the beginning of the following spring, when Cyrus had punished the Ganges by dividing it among the 360 canals, he marched against Babylon at last. The Babylonians sallied out and awaited him, and when he came near their city in his march, they engaged him, but they were beaten and driven inside the city. There they had stored provisions enough for very many years, because they knew already that Cyrus was not a man of no ambition, and saw that he attacked all nations alike. So now they were indifferent to the siege, and Cyrus did not know what to do, being so long delayed and gaining no advantage. Whether someone advised him in his difficulty, or whether he perceived for himself what to do, I do not know, but he did the following. He posted his army at the place where the river goes into the city, and another part of it behind the city, where the river comes out of the city, and told his men to enter the city by the channel of the Euphrates when they saw it to be fordable. Having disposed them and given this command, he himself marched away with those of his army who could not fight. And when he came to the lake, Cyrus dealt with it and with the river, just as had the Babylonian queen. Drawing off the river by a canal into the lake, which was a marsh, he made the stream sink until its former channel could be forded. When this happened, the Persians who were posted with this objective made their way into Babylon by the channel of the Euphrates, which had now sunk to a depth of about the middle of a man's thigh. Now if the Babylonians had known beforehand, or learned what Cyrus was up to, they would have let the Persians enter the city and have destroyed them utterly, for then they would have shut all the gates that opened on the river, and mounted the walls that ran along the river banks, and so caught their enemies in a trap. But as it was, the Persians took them unawares, and because of the great size of the city, those who dwell there say, those in the outer parts of it were overcome, but the inhabitants of the middle part knew nothing of it. All this time they were dancing and celebrating a holiday which happened to fall then, until they learned the truth only too well. And Babylon then for the first time was taken in this way. I shall show how great the power of Babylon is by many other means, but particularly by this. All the land that the great king rules is parcelled out to provision him and his army, and pays tribute besides. Now the territory of Babylon feeds him for 4 of the 12 months in the year, the whole of the rest of Asia providing for the other 8. Thus the wealth of Assyria is 1/3 of the entire wealth of Asia. The governorship of this land, which the Persians call satrapy, is by far the most powerful of all the governorships, since the daily income of Tritanticmes, son of Artabazus, who governed this province by the king's will, was an artaber full of silver. The artaber is a Persian measure containing more than an Attic bedimnus by 3 Attic chenixes. And besides war horses, he had 800 stallions in his stables, and 16,000 brood mares, each stallion servicing 20 mares. Moreover, he kept so great a number of Indian dogs that 4 great villages of the plain were appointed to provide food for the dogs, and exempted from all other burdens. Such were the riches of the governor of Babylon. There is little rain in Assyria. This nourishes the roots of the grain, but it is irrigation from the river that ripens the crop and brings the grain to fullness. In Egypt, the river itself rises and floods the fields. In Assyria, they are watered by hand and by swinging beams. For the whole land of Babylon, like Egypt, is cut across by canals. The greatest of these is navigable. It runs towards where the sun rises in winter, from the Euphrates to another river, the Tigris, on which stood the city of Ninus. This land is by far the most fertile in grain which we know. It does not even try to bear trees, fig, vine, or olive, but Demeter's grain is so abundant there that it yields for the most part 200-fold, and even 300-fold when the harvest is best. The blades of the wheat and barley there are easily 4 fingers broad, and for millet and sesame I will not say to what height they grow, though it is known to me, for I am well aware that even what I have said regarding grain is wholly disbelieved by those who have never visited Babylonia. They use no oil except what they make from sesame. There are palm trees there growing all over the plain, most of them yielding fruit, from which food is made, and wine, and honey. The Assyrians tend these like figs, and chiefly in this respect, that they tie the fruit of the palm, called male by the Greeks, to the date-bearing palm, so that the gall-fly may enter the dates and cause them to ripen, and that the fruit of the palm may not fall. For the male palms, like unripened figs, have gall-flies in their fruit. I am going to indicate what seems to me to be the most marvelous thing in the country next to the city itself. Their boats, which ply the river and go to Babylon, are all of skins and round. They make these in Armenia higher up the stream than Assyria. First they cut frames of willow, then they stretch hides over these for a covering, making as it were a hold. They neither broaden the stern nor narrow the prow, but the boat is round like a shield. They then fill it with reeds and send it floating down the river with a cargo, and it is for the most part palm wood casks of wine that they carry down. 2 men standing upright steer the boat, each with a paddle, one drawing it to him, the other thrusting it from him. These boats are of all sizes, some small, some very large. The largest of them are of as much as 5,000 talents burden. There is a live ass in each boat, or more than one in the larger. So when they have floated down to Babylon and disposed of their cargo, they sell the framework of the boat and all the reeds. The hides are set on the backs of asses, which are then driven back to Armenia, for it is not by any means possible to go upstream by water because of the swiftness of the current. It is for this reason that they make their boats of hides and not of wood. When they have driven their asses back into Armenia, they make more boats in the same way. Such then are their boats. For clothing they wear a linen tunic, reaching to the feet. Over this the Babylonian puts on another tunic of wool, and wraps himself in a white mantle. He wears the shoes of his country, which are like Boeotian sandals. Their hair is worn long and covered by caps. The whole body is perfumed. Every man has a seal and a carved staff, and on every staff is some image, such as that of an apple, or a rose, or a lily, or an eagle. no one carries a staff without an image. This is the equipment of their persons. I will now speak of their established customs. The wisest of these, in our judgment, is one which I have learned by inquiry is also a custom of the Enetae in Illyria. It is this: once a year in every village all the maidens, as they attained marriageable age, were collected and brought together into one place, with a crowd of men standing around. Then a crier would display and offer them for sale one by one, first the fairest of all, and then, when she had fetched a great price, he put up for sale the next most attractive, selling all the maidens as lawful wives. Rich men of Assyria who desired to marry would outbid each other for the fairest. The ordinary people who desired to marry and had no use for beauty could take the ugly ones, and money besides, for when the crier had sold all the most attractive, he would put up the one that was least beautiful, or crippled, and offer her to whoever would take her to wife for the least amount, until she fell to one who promised to accept least. The money came from the sale of the attractive ones, who thus paid the dowry of the ugly and the crippled. But a man could not give his daughter in marriage to whomever he liked, nor could one that bought a girl take her away without giving security that he would in fact make her his wife. And if the couple could not agree, it was a law that the money be returned. Men might also come from other villages to buy if they so desired. This then was their best custom, but it does not continue at this time. They have invented a new one lately, so that the women be not wronged or taken to another city. Since the conquest of Babylon made them afflicted and poor, every one of the people that lacks a livelihood prostitutes his daughters. I come now to the next wisest of their customs. Having no use for physicians, they carry the sick into the marketplace. Then those who have been afflicted themselves by the same illness as the sick man's, or seen others in like case, come near and advise him about his disease, and comfort him, telling him by what means they have themselves recovered from it, or seen others recover. No one may pass by the sick man without speaking and asking after his sickness. The dead are embalmed in honey for burial, and their dirges are like the dirges of Egypt. Whenever a Babylonian has had intercourse with his wife, they both sit before a burnt offering of incense, and at dawn they wash themselves. They will touch no vessel before this is done. This is the custom in Arabia also. The foulest Babylonian custom is that which compels every woman of the land to sit in the temple of Aphrodite and have intercourse with some stranger once in her life. Many women who are rich and proud, and disdain to mingle with the rest, drive to the temple in covered carriages drawn by teams, and stand there with a great retinue of attendants. But most sit down in the sacred plot of Aphrodite, with crowns of cord on their heads. There is a great multitude of women coming and going. Passages marked by line run every way through the crowd, by which the men pass and make their choice. Once a woman has taken her place there, she does not go away to her home before some stranger has cast money into her lap and had intercourse with her outside the temple. But while he casts the money, he must say, "I invite you in the name of Mylitta." That is the Assyrian name for Aphrodite. It does not matter what sum the money is, the woman will never refuse, for that would be a sin, the money being by this act made sacred. So she follows the first man who casts it, and rejects no one. After their intercourse, having discharged her sacred duty to the goddess, she goes away to her home, and thereafter there is no bribe, however great, that will get her. So then the women that are fair and tall are soon free to depart. But the uncomely have long to wait, because they cannot fulfill the law. For some of them remain for 3 years or 4. There is a custom like this in some parts of Cyprus. These are established customs among the Babylonians. Furthermore, there are 3 tribes in the country that eat nothing but fish, which they catch and dry in the sun. Then, after throwing it into a mortar, they pound it with pestles, and strain everything through linen. Then whoever desires kneads, as it were, a cake of it, and eats it. Others bake it like bread. When Cyrus had conquered this nation too, he wanted to subject the Massagetae. These are said to be a great and powerful people, dwelling towards the east and the sunrise, beyond the Araxes and opposite the Essidanes, and some say that they are a Scythian people. The Araxes is said by some to be greater, and by some to be less, than the Ister. It is reported that there are many islands in it as big as Lesbos, and men on them who in summer live on roots of all kinds that they dig up, and in winter on fruit that they have got from trees when it was ripe and stored for food. And they know, it is said, of trees bearing a fruit whose effect is this. Gathering in groups and kindling a fire, the people sit around it, and throw the fruit into the flames. Then the fumes of it, as it burns, make them drunk, as the Greeks are with wine, and more drunk as more fruit is thrown on the fire, until at last they rise up to dance and even sing. Such is said to be their way of life. The Araxes flows from the country of the Metaenae, as does the Gyndes, which Cyrus divided into the 360 channels, and empties itself through 40 mouths, of which all except one issue into bogs and swamps, where men are said to live, whose food is raw fish, and their customary dress sealskins. The one remaining stream of the Araxes flows in a clear channel into the Caspian Sea. Now the Caspian Sea is apart by itself, not having connection with the other sea. For all that sea which the Hellenes navigate, and the sea beyond the Pillars, which is called Atlantis, and the Erythraean Sea, are in fact all one, but the Caspian is separate, and lies apart by itself. In length it is a voyage of 15 days, if one uses oars, and in breadth, where it is broadest, a voyage of 8 days. On the side towards the west of this sea, the Caucasus runs along by it, which is of all mountain ranges both the greatest in extent and the loftiest. And the Caucasus has many various races of men dwelling in it, living for the most part on the wild produce of the forests. And among them there are said to be trees which produce leaves of such a kind that by pounding them and mixing water with them, they paint figures upon their garments, and the figures do not wash out, but grow old with the woolen stuff, as if they had been woven into it at the first. And men say that the sexual intercourse of these people is open, like that of cattle. This sea, called Caspian, is hemmed in to the west by the Caucasus. Towards the east and the sunrise there stretches from its shores a boundless plain as far as the eye can see. The greater part of this wide plain is the country of the Massagetae, against whom Cyrus was eager to lead his army. For there were many weighty reasons that impelled and encouraged him to do so. First, his birth, because of which he seemed to be something more than mortal, and next his victories in his wars. For no nation that Cyrus undertook to attack could escape from him. Now at this time the Massagetae were ruled by a queen called Tomyris, whose husband was dead. Cyrus sent a message with a pretence of wanting her for his wife, but Tomyris would have none of his advances, well understanding that he wanted not her, but the kingdom of the Massagetae. So when guile was of no avail, Cyrus marched to the Araxes and openly prepared to attack the Massagetae. He bridged the river for his army to cross, and built towers on the pontoons bridging the river. But while he was busy at this, Tomyris sent a herald to him with this message: "O king of the Medes, stop hurrying on what you are hurrying on, for you cannot know whether the completion of this work will be for your advantage. Stop, and be king of your own country, and endure seeing us ruling those whom we rule. But if you will not take this advice, and will do anything rather than remain at peace, then, if you so greatly desire to try the strength of the Massagetae, stop your present work of bridging the river, and let us withdraw 3 days' journey from the Araxes, and when that is done, cross into our country. Or if you prefer to receive us into your country, then withdraw yourself, as I have said." Hearing this, Cyrus called together the leading Persians, and laid the matter before them, asking them to advise him which he should do. They all spoke to the same end, urging him to let Tomyris and her army enter his country. But Croesus the Lydian, who was present, was displeased by their advice, and spoke against it. "O king," he said, "you have before now heard from me that since Zeus has given me to you, I will turn aside to the best of my ability whatever misadventure I see threatening your house, and disaster has been my teacher. Now, if you think that you and the army that you lead are immortal, I have no business giving you advice. But if you know that you and those whom you rule are only men, then I must first teach you this. Men's fortunes are on a wheel, which in its turning does not allow the same man to prosper forever. So, if that is the case, I am not of the same opinion about the business in hand as these other counsellors of yours. This is the danger if we agree to let the enemy enter your country. If you lose the battle, you lose your empire also. For it is plain that if the Massagetae win, they will not retreat, but will march against your provinces. And if you conquer them, it is a lesser victory than if you crossed into their country, and routed the Massagetae, and pursued them. For I weigh your chances against theirs, and suppose that when you have beaten your adversaries, you will march for the seat of Tomyris' power. And besides what I have shown, it would be a shameful thing, and not to be endured, if Cyrus the son of Cambyses should yield and give ground before a woman. Now then, it occurs to me that we should cross and go forward as far as they draw back, and that then we should endeavour to overcome them by doing as I shall show. As I understand, the Massagetae have no experience of the good things of Persia, and have never fared well as to what is greatly desirable. Therefore I advise you to cut up the meat of many of your sheep and goats into generous portions for these men, and to cook it and serve it as a feast in our camp, providing many bowls of unmixed wine, and all kinds of food. Then let your army withdraw to the river again, leaving behind that part of it which is of least value. For if I am not mistaken in my judgment, when the Massagetae see so many good things, they will give themselves over to feasting on them, and it will be up to us then to accomplish great things." So these opinions clashed, and Cyrus set aside his former plan, and chose that of Croesus. Consequently he told Tomyris to draw her army off, for he would cross, he said, and attack her. So she withdrew, as she had promised before. Then he entrusted Croesus to the care of his own son Cambyses, to whom he would leave his sovereignty, telling Cambyses to honour Croesus and treat him well, if the crossing of the river against the Massagetae should not go well. With these instructions he sent the two back to Persia, and he and his army crossed the river. After he had crossed the Araxes, he dreamed that night, while sleeping in the country of the Massagetae, that he saw the eldest of Hystaspes' sons with wings on his shoulders, the one wing overshadowing Asia and the other Europe. Hystaspes, son of Arsames, was Anachimenid, and Darius was the eldest of his sons, then about 20 years old. This Darius had been left behind in Persia, not yet being of an age to go on campaign. So when Cyrus awoke, he considered his vision, and because it seemed to him to be of great importance, he sent for Hystaspes, and said to him privately, "Hystaspes, I have caught your son plotting against me and my sovereignty, and I will tell you how I know this for certain. The gods care for me, and show me beforehand all that is coming. Now then, I have seen in a dream in the past night your eldest son with wings on his shoulders, overshadowing Asia with the one, and Europe with the other. From this vision there is no way that he is not plotting against me. Therefore hurry back to Persia, and see that when I come back after subjecting this country, you bring your son before me to be questioned about this." Cyrus said this, thinking that Darius was plotting against him, but in fact heaven was showing him that he himself was to die in the land where he was, and Darius inherit his kingdom. So then Hystaspes replied with this: "O king, may there not be any Persian born who would plot against you, but if there is, may he perish suddenly, for you have made the Persians free men instead of slaves, and rulers of all instead of subjects of any. But if your vision does indeed signify that my son is planning revolution, I give him to you to treat as you like." After having given this answer and crossed the Araxes, Hystaspes went to Persia to watch his son for Cyrus, and Cyrus, advancing a day's journey from the Araxes, acted according to Croesus' advice. Cyrus and the sound portion of the Persian army marched back to the Araxes, leaving behind those that were useless. A third of the Massagetae forces attacked those of the army who were left behind, and destroyed them despite resistance. Then, when they had overcome their enemies, seeing the banquet spread, they sat down and feasted, and after they had had their fill of food and wine, they fell asleep. Then the Persians attacked them, killing many, and taking many more alive, among whom was the son of Tomyris the queen, Spargapises by name, the leader of the Massagetae. When Tomyris heard what had happened to her army and her son, she sent a herald to Cyrus with this message: "Cyrus, who can never get enough blood, do not be elated by what you have done. It is nothing to be proud of if, by the fruit of the vine, with which you Persians fill yourselves and rage so violently that evil words rise in a flood to your lips when the wine enters your bodies, if, by tricking him with this drug, you got the better of my son, and not by force of arms in battle. Now then, take a word of good advice from me. Give me back my son, and leave this country unpunished, even though you have savaged a third of the Massagetae army. But if you will not, then I swear to you by the Sun, Lord of the Massagetae, that I shall give even you, who can never get enough of it, your fill of blood." Cyrus dismissed this warning when it was repeated to him. But Spargapises, the son of the queen Tomyris, after the wine wore off and he recognized his evil plight, asked Cyrus to be freed from his bonds, and this was granted him. But as soon as he was freed and had the use of his hands, he did away with himself. Such was the end of Spargapises. Tomyris, when Cyrus would not listen to her, collected all her forces and engaged him. This fight I judge to have been the fiercest ever fought by men that were not Greek, and indeed I have learned that this was so. For first, it is said, they shot arrows at each other from a distance. Then, when their arrows were all spent, they rushed at each other and fought with their spears and swords, and for a long time they stood fighting, and neither would give ground. But at last the Massagetae got the upper hand. The greater part of the Persian army was destroyed there on the spot, and Cyrus himself fell there, after having reigned for 1 year short of 30 years. Tomyris filled a skin with human blood, and searched among the Persian dead for Cyrus' body. And when she found it, she pushed his head into the skin, and insulted the dead man in these words: "Though I am alive and have defeated you in battle, you have destroyed me, taking my son by guile. But just as I threatened, I give you your fill of blood." Many stories are told of Cyrus' death. This that I have told is the most credible. These Massagetae are like the Scythians in their dress and way of life. They are both cavalry and infantry, having some of each kind, and spearmen and archers, and it is their custom to carry battle axes. They always use gold and bronze. All their spear points and arrowheads and battle axes are bronze, and the adornment of their headgear and belts and girdles is gold. They equip their horses similarly, protecting their chests with bronze breastplates, and putting gold on reins, bits, and cheekplates. But they never use iron and silver, for there is none at all in their country, but gold and bronze abound. Now for their customs. Each man marries a wife, but the wives are common to all. The Greeks say this is a Scythian custom. It is not, but a custom of the Massagetae. There, when a man desires a woman, he hangs his quiver before her wagon, and has intercourse with her without fear. Though they fix no certain term to life, yet when a man is very old, all his family meet together, and kill him, with beasts of the flock besides, then boil the flesh, and feast on it. This is held to be the happiest death. When a man dies of an illness, they do not eat him, but bury him in the earth, and lament that he did not live to be killed. They never plant seed. Their fare is their livestock, and the fish which they take in abundance from the Araxes. Their drink is milk. The sun is the only god whom they worship. They sacrifice horses to him. The reasoning is that he is the swiftest of the gods, and therefore they give him the swiftest of mortal things. End of Book 1. Recording by Graham Redman.